Just after 2 in the morning on a hot August night in Iowa in 1983, 52 Angus bulls poured through the cut fence line into Ruthie Colson's cornfield, 2,000 pounds apiece, crushing stalks 3 weeks short of harvest under hooves that didn't slow down once they hit open ground. By the time Ruthie made it to the porch in her robe, half her crop was already gone, corn folding flat beneath, animals moving in a single, unstoppable wave toward the far tree line. Walton Pierce was parked on the county road watching it happen, his engine running and his headlights off. He drove past again the next morning, once the damage was done, slowing just long enough to take in the wreckage, and he didn't bother hiding the satisfaction on his face. He'd been trying to buy Ruthie's 200 acres for 18 months, each offer a little more impatient than the last, and he was fairly sure a ruined corn harvest, just 3 weeks before it was supposed to pay her bills, would finally be the thing that changed her answer. He was smiling too soon. Ruthie hadn't called him. She hadn't gone out to the fence line to argue. She'd walked straight to the shed instead, pulled the memory card from the trail camera she kept up for deer season, and sat at her kitchen table that morning with coffee going cold beside her, running the footage back. Walton's own ranch hand cutting her fence wire at 2 a.m., and Walton's truck, engine idling, sitting on the road the whole time while it happened. What Walton didn't understand yet, standing at his own gate congratulating himself, was that 52 registered bulls standing on somebody else's land without permission aren't just a mess to apologize for. As you watch, see if you can figure out what Ruthie was doing with that trail camera footage before she ever said a single word to him, because by the time this was over, it wasn't her land on the line anymore. She'd woken to the sound before she understood what it was, a low, ground-shaking rumble that didn't fit any noise a 200-acre farm was supposed to make at 2 in the morning, followed almost immediately by the sharp, unmistakable snap of high tinsel wire giving way somewhere out past the barn. Ruthie was on the porch in her robe within a minute, barefoot on the cold boards, staring out at a field she'd walked every day for 15 years now, filling with shapes she couldn't fully make sense of in the dark. Then the yard light from Walton's own property caught enough of them for her to understand. Bulls. Not 2 or 3 that had wandered off pasture the way cattle sometimes did. Dozens of them. A solid moving mass pouring through a gap in her fence line and straight into corn that had been 3 weeks from harvest that same afternoon. She could hear it as much as see it, stalks snapping under weight in a steady, relentless rhythm, the particular violence of 2,000 pounds moving without any regard for what stood in the way. She didn't go running out into the dark after them. There wasn't a version of that decision that ended with anything but a woman alone getting hurt trying to reason with panicked livestock in pitch black. She stood on the porch instead, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, and made herself watch the whole thing happen, memorizing what she could of the shapes and the direction and the timing, because some old instinct told her, even in that first disoriented minute, that she was going to need to remember this clearly by morning. It took the better part of 20 minutes for the worst of it to pass, the herd finally slowing as they spread out across the damaged rows, and Ruthie went back inside only once she was reasonably sure nothing was about to come through the yard itself. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the lights off, going over the sequence of sounds in her head, and waited for enough daylight to actually see what she was dealing with. Ruthie had run the Colson place alone since her father died 15 years earlier, 200 acres of corn ground in Middle Tennessee that had never carried a mortgage in her lifetime, debt-free the way her father had raised her to believe land was supposed to be kept. She'd never married, never had cause to explain to a husband why she wasn't interested in selling out to whoever came along with a bigger number, and by the time Walton Pierce bought the neighboring spread 18 months earlier, she'd already turned down 4 separate offers from 3 separate buyers over the years without losing much sleep over any of them. Walton was different mostly in how badly he wanted what she had. He ran a registered black Angus breeding operation on the property next door, real money in individual animals rather than just beef cattle, and the creek that ran along Ruthie's back property line was the one piece of water access his own spread didn't have. He'd been polite at first, the way men with money usually started out being polite, driving over with a folder of numbers and a handshake that lasted a beat too long. The first offer, back when he'd only owned the neighboring spread a few months, had been almost embarrassingly low, the kind of number a man offers when he assumes a woman farming alone hasn't had time to think carefully about what her land was worth. Ruthie had turned it down over coffee, she hadn't offered to refill, and Walton had taken the rejection well enough that first time, chalking it up, she suspected, to a negotiation opener rather than a real answer. The second offer came 6 months later, considerably higher, delivered with the same handshake and a line about how much easier her life could be without 200 acres to manage single-handed. The third, that winter, higher still, accompanied by a comment about how property taxes only ever went one direction that Ruthie understood, even then, as the first hint of something less patient underneath his politeness. By the fourth offer, that following spring, Polite had curdled into something closer to irritation. A man who genuinely couldn't understand why a woman running 200 acres by herself wouldn't jump at a number that would have set her up comfortably for the rest of her life. "You understand what you're sitting on, Ruthie," he told her that last visit, standing in her kitchen rather than sitting at the table this time, arms crossed in a way that hadn't been there the first 3 visits. "Creek access alone is worth more than you're going to make farming corn for the next 20 years combined. It's not for sale, Walton. Wasn't for sale the first 3 times either. You say that like it's some kind of principle. It's just corn, Ruthie. Corn prices go up, corn prices go down. This is real money I'm offering you, guaranteed, right now, instead of hoping the weather cooperates every single season for the rest of your working life. It's not about the money. It never has been." He hadn't argued that day beyond a short, frustrated exhale. He'd just looked at her a long moment. The particular look of a man doing math in his head that didn't have her cooperation anywhere in it, and driven off without saying much else. The morning after the bulls came through, Ruthie walked the damaged rows before she did anything else. Boots sinking into ground churned to mud, corn stalks she'd watched come up in April now flattened in a wide, unmistakable swath running clean through the middle of her best acreage. It was bad. She'd farmed long enough to know within the first 10 minutes of walking it that this wasn't a section she could salvage with careful harvesting around the edges. Whatever the bulls hadn't trampled outright, they'd grazed down close enough to the ground that there wasn't going to be much of a crop left standing once the dust settled. She didn't let herself stand there feeling sorry about it for long. She'd learned that from her father too, the specific discipline of grief that gets you nowhere useful. And by the time she'd finished walking the rows, she had a plan taking shape that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with documentation. The trail camera was mounted on a post at the northeast corner of the field, angled toward the tree line where deer usually came through, more habit than expectation most seasons. She hadn't thought about it specifically the night before, too busy standing on the porch in shock watching 52 animals do more damage in 20 minutes than a bad hailstorm usually managed in an hour. It was only walking back toward the house that she remembered it was there at all, and something in her chest went very still and very focused at the thought of what it might have caught. The footage was better than she'd let herself hope for. Time-stamped, clear enough even in the dark to make out faces under the yard light. Walton's own operation kept burning at the property line. His ranch hand, a younger man Ruthie recognized from the feed store, working bolt cutters on the fence wire with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd been told exactly what to do and given plenty of time to do it. And behind him, parked on the county road with the engine running and the headlights off, Walton's own truck, sitting there the whole 11 minutes it took to cut the fence and haze 52 bulls through the gap. Ruthie watched it twice, then a third time, taking notes in the same small spiral notebook she used for keeping track of planting dates and fertilizer costs. Timestamp. Description. The ranch hand's name, which she was fairly sure she remembered correctly from enough small talk at the feed store over the years. She didn't call Walton. She called the sheriff's office instead, and then the county extension agent, in that order, before the coffee in her cup had even gone properly cold. The ranch hand's name turned out to be Denny Vance, 24 years old, 3 years into working for Walton and, according to what he eventually told Deputy Combs during a separate interview that same week, not entirely comfortable with the instruction he'd been given that night, even as he carried it out. "He told me it was just going to look like an accident," Denny said, according to the statement that later became part of the county's file. "Said a gate left open, cattle wander. Happens all the time. Nobody could ever prove different. I didn't love it. But he's signing my checks, and I've got a kid at home, and I told myself it wasn't really hurting anybody bad, just some corn." Denny wasn't charged the same way Walton was, the deputy's report noted, fairly, that a young employee following a direct order from his employer sat in a different category than the man who'd given it. But the statement itself did real work in the weeks that followed, removing any last possibility that Walton could credibly claim the whole thing had genuinely been an accident. Ruthie never spoke to Denny directly about any of it, though she saw him at the feed store a few times over the following year, and each time he looked at her with an expression that read less like guilt over getting caught, and more like a young man who'd learned something true about the kind of person he wanted to work for going forward. Deputy Averill Combs came out that same morning, walked the damaged field with Ruthie, photographed the flattened corn and the cut fence wire from every angle she pointed him toward, and watched the trail camera footage on her kitchen laptop with an expression that told Ruthie plainly he understood exactly what he was looking at. "That's about as clean as evidence gets," he said. "Time-stamped, faces visible, his own vehicle sitting right there the whole time. I'll be citing him for criminal trespass and property damage. That's the easy part. What's the hard part? The hard part's on your end, not mine. You've got 52 head of somebody else's livestock standing on your property right now. Technically speaking, Tennessee's a fenced state. Man's responsible for keeping his own stock contained, not you responsible for keeping it out. That means you've got real options here beyond just a trespass citation." He nodded toward the county extension office's number, already written on the card he handed her. "Talk to Delia over there before you do anything else. She'll walk you through the impoundment side of it better than I can." Delia Frazier had run the county extension office for going on 20 years, and she didn't waste time once Ruthie explained what had happened. Livestock at large on somebody's land without their consent. County code lets you impound the animals right there where they're standing, Delia said. You notify the owner formally, you document everything, feed costs, boarding, any damage the animals cause while they're in your care, and he owes you for every bit of it before he gets his stock back. Most folks don't know that provision exists because most folks never have cause to use it. You clearly do. He's going to fight this. He can fight it all he wants. Doesn't change what your camera caught him doing. Delia pulled a thin binder off her shelf, flipping to a tabbed section she'd clearly marked years earlier for exactly this kind of situation. Here's the exact code language, so you're not taking my word alone for any of it. Notice has to go out within a reasonable window, has to specify the animals by tag number where you've got them, and you need a written log of every cost starting the day they came onto your land, not the day you decide to formalize things. Judges like paper trails that started on day one, not paper trails somebody assembled after the fact once a lawyer got involved. I don't have a lawyer. You might need one before this is finished, but you don't need one to start the log today. That part's just discipline. Delia looked at her a long moment. 52 registered breeding bulls, Ruthie. That's not a herd a man can afford to have tied up in a legal dispute during breeding season. You've got more leverage here than you might realize yet, provided you document it clean from the very first day. The bulls themselves weren't cooperating with anyone's plans that first full day, scattered across the damaged field and the pasture beyond it, agitated by the strange ground and the fence line they'd been driven through in the dark. 52 animals that size didn't herd easily even under the best circumstances, and these weren't the best circumstances. Several of them still spooked hours later, pacing the fence line Ruthie had temporarily patched, a couple of the younger bulls butting heads over territory that belonged to neither of them. Ruthie called a livestock hauler she trusted to help pin them properly in her own holding lot rather than leave 2,000-pound animals wandering loose on already damaged ground. And the work of actually moving 52 agitated bulls into a holding pen built for a fraction, that number took most of the afternoon, both of them working slow and careful, aware the whole time that a spooked animal that size could do real damage to a person who rushed it. It was during that work, mid-afternoon, sweat-soaked and both of them running low on patience, that the complication arrived that neither she nor Delia had accounted for. Two of the bulls had gotten tangled in a section of old barbed wire near the property's back corner sometime during the chaos of the night before. Old fencing Ruthie had meant to replace for 2 seasons now and never quite gotten to. One of them badly enough that Ruthie could see torn hide and a leg held wrong from 30 yards off. The animal was favoring it hard. Weight shifted awkwardly, clearly in real distress every time it tried to move with the rest of the agitated herd. She called her own large animal vet before she called anyone else, a decision that cost her another few $100s she hadn't planned on spending that week but felt standing there looking at an animal in real pain, like the only decision available to a person who'd grown up on a working farm. "This one's going to need more than a field dressing," the vet told her, examining the worst of the two. "Deep enough laceration, and I don't love how he's carrying that leg. Whoever owns him needs a proper vet out here today, not tomorrow." Ruthie photographed the injury before the vet even finished the exam, adding it to the growing file on her kitchen table, not out of cruelty, but because she understood, watching an animal suffer for a decision that had nothing to do with the animal itself, that this detail mattered for reasons beyond her own crop damage. A man who'd released 52 bulls into a stranger's field in the dark, injuring 2 of his own valuable animals in the process, had a welfare problem sitting right alongside his trespass problem. The bull's own vet came out 2 days later, once Walton finally arranged it, and confirmed what Ruthie's own vet had already suspected: the leg would heal, but not without weeks of restricted movement and a scar that would show for the rest of the animal's life, an unglamorous, permanent mark on a registered breeding bull worth real money in genetics alone. Ruthie kept that bull separated from the rest of the herd in her own holding pen the whole time he remained impounded, tending to him herself twice a day despite owing him and his owner nothing beyond basic decency, because an animal in pain wasn't the one who'd made the decision to put him there. Walton showed up at her gate that same evening, no longer smiling, having apparently heard through his own ranch hand or the sheriff's office or simply the fast-moving grapevine of a small county that this wasn't unfolding the way he'd planned it. "I want my bulls back, Ruthie. You'll get them back. Once you've settled what you owe for the crop damage, the boarding, and the vet bill on the bull that's hurt bad enough he needed real treatment today. That's extortion. That's county code, Walton. Vincent State. Your animals, your responsibility, and they're on my land without my consent causing damage I can document 6 ways from Sunday." Ruthie didn't raise her voice, standing at her own gate with the same steady tone she'd have used discussing weather. "I've got trail camera footage of your own hand cutting my fence and your own truck sitting on the road watching him do it. Sheriff's already seen it. I'd think real carefully before I called anything I'm doing extortion." He didn't have an answer for that. He stood there a long moment, jaw working, and left without the bulls and without much else to say. The formal impoundment notice went out through the county the following day, and with it, the daily accounting Ruthie had started keeping the moment Delia explained how the provision worked: boarding costs per head, feed consumption, the vet bill for the injured bull that would need follow-up care for weeks, and the crop damage assessment that arrived from an agricultural adjuster 3 days later confirming what Ruthie had already known walking the field that first morning. The adjuster, a careful, soft-spoken man named Gary Ostrander who'd assessed crop damage across the county for going on a decade, walked the rows with her slowly, stopping every few yards to examine stocks and take notes on a tablet he carried in a weatherproof case. "This section here," he said, gesturing at the worst of the trampling, "there's no salvaging this. Stalks are broken below the ear, root systems disturbed enough the plants won't finish filling out even if they technically survive to harvest. I'd call this a total loss, this whole strip." He moved further down the row, crouching to examine a section that looked marginally better. "This part might come back enough to combine, but you're looking at reduced yield, maybe 40% of what you'd have gotten otherwise. Grazing damage does that even where the stalks themselves are still standing. So what's the honest number, Gary? Not a range. The actual number." He didn't answer right away, finishing his notes first, the way a careful man does when he'd rather be precise than fast. "Little over 14,000 in direct crop value. Best I can figure it, plus whatever this section's yield reduction costs you on top of that once we run the full numbers next week." Roughly a third of her cornfield was a total loss. Not damaged but salvageable. Gone, 3 weeks before what should have been the best harvest she'd had in years, replaced by trampled, grazed-down stalks that weren't producing anything worth combining. Ruthie sat with that number along while the evening it came in, understanding clearly that whatever came of the rest of this particular loss wasn't one she was getting back. No amount of impoundment leverage over Walton's bulls was going to put that corn back in the ground before winter, and she'd learned enough about farming over the years to know that some losses simply had to be absorbed rather than fixed, however satisfying the rest of the reckoning turned out to be. Word moved through the county the way it always did once the sheriff's citation became public record, and somebody at the feed store mentioned the trail camera footage to somebody else. It wasn't universal sympathy. A few of the old-timers muttered that a woman farming 200 acres alone should have expected trouble sooner or later, the same tired line Ruthie had been hearing in one form or another her whole adult life. But most of the county sided with her plainly. The specific, unhurried judgment small places pass on newcomers who show up with money and start acting like the rules apply differently to them. The county paper ran a short piece the following week, factual rather than sensational, quoting the sheriff's office on the citation and noting, in a sentence that Ruthie suspected did more damage to Walton's standing than anything else in the article, that the incident remained under a formal livestock impoundment while damages were assessed. Support showed up in practical form more than sympathetic words, which suited Ruthie better anyway. A neighbor 2 farms down, a man named Harlan Beckett who'd known her father back when they were both young enough to still be breaking their own horses, drove over unasked the second day with an extra roll of fencing wire and 2 of his own hands to help hold the temporary patch while the holding pin situation got sorted properly. Wasn't going to let you handle 52 head of somebody else's bulls by yourself while you're also trying to keep your own operation running, Harlan said, when Ruthie tried to wave off the help. Your daddy'd have done the same for me, and you know it. She didn't argue with him past that. She'd learned a long time ago that refusing help offered plainly, by people who meant it plainly, was its own kind of foolish pride, and there was enough real work in front of her that week without adding stubbornness to the list of things she was carrying alone. Breeding season pressure did more to move Walton than pride ever would have. 52 registered bulls sitting idle in another farmer's holding pen, accruing costs by the day, wasn't a problem a man could simply wait out. Not with his own operation's breeding schedule bearing down, and every day the animals stayed impounded costing him twice over, once in boarding fees, and once in lost breeding time, he couldn't easily make up later in the season. He'd apparently spent the better part of a week with his own attorney before coming back, a fact Ruthie only learned secondhand later, through Delia, who'd fielded a call from Walton's lawyer asking pointed questions about the exact language of the county's impoundment code. The lawyer's assessment, according to what eventually made its way back to Ruthie through the small county grapevine, had been blunt, time-stamped video evidence of a client's own employee cutting a fence, with the client's own vehicle visible watching it happen, wasn't a case worth taking to court. It was a case worth settling quietly and as quickly as pride would allow. He came back to Ruthie's gate 10 days after the first visit, considerably less combative than he'd been either of the previous 2 times. What's it going to take to end this? Ruthie didn't answer him standing at the gate. She went inside, came back out with the folder she'd been keeping since that first morning, the crop damage assessment, the boarding costs itemized by day, the vet bill for the injured bull, the sheriff's citation copy, and handed it to him rather than saying much of anything at all. He read through it standing right there in her driveway, jaw tightening further with each page, until he reached the total at the bottom and went quiet in the specific way of a man realizing arguing further wasn't going to change the arithmetic in front of him. This is more than what I offered you for the land. I know. Ruthie didn't say it unkindly, just plainly, the same tone she'd used the whole time. You should have thought about that before you decided cutting my fence was cheaper than taking no for an answer. He paid it. Certified funds, within the week, once his own lawyer confirmed there wasn't a version of fighting the camera footage that ended better for him than simply settling. Ruthie released the bulls back across the property line the same afternoon the payment cleared, walking the fence line herself to make sure the new wire held properly this time, and didn't say much to Walton beyond confirming the last of them were off her land. He never brought up buying her farm again. Not that fall, not the following spring, not once in all the years afterward that their 2 operations kept sharing the same stretch of county road. The corn didn't come back that season. Ruthie replanted what she could on ground still torn up enough that it wasn't worth the effort, and took the loss on the rest, insurance and settlement money covering some, but not all of what a genuinely good harvest would have brought her that particular year. She didn't pretend otherwise to anyone who asked, including herself. Winning the dispute hadn't undone the damage. It had just made sure the cost of it landed where it actually belonged, instead of quietly becoming hers to absorb alone. Delia stopped by that November, mostly on her own time rather than county business, and the 2 women sat on Ruthie's porch while looking out at the damage section, still waiting on next year to fix itself properly. A lot of folks in your position would have just taken whatever check he offered and been glad to have it, Delia said. Not many would have thought to pull that camera footage first, let alone know the code well enough to use it right. I didn't know the code at all until you told me, Ruthie said. I just knew I wasn't going to stand there and let him walk away smiling like he'd won something. Delia didn't say much else to that, just nodded the way people do when a plain answer is the truest one available. And the two of them sat a while longer watching the light go gold over a field that still had some healing left to do. The following spring, new corn came up green across the same field, most of it right on schedule. One section along the northeast corner planted 2 weeks later than the rest after the ground there had needed extra time to recover from being churned to mud the previous October. It stood out clearly against the rest of the field that whole season, visibly behind. A permanent small reminder, standing right there in the middle of otherwise ordinary rows. Ruthie walked that field most evenings the way she always had, the way her father had before her, and she didn't mind the late section standing out the way it did. Some things a person doesn't need fixed all the way, just accounted for honestly, and left standing where you can see them. If a story like this, where somebody trying to destroy what you built ends up handing you exactly what you needed to protect it, is the kind of thing that stays with you, subscribe. And if you've ever had somebody underestimate you and pay for it in ways they never saw coming, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear it.